All right, welcome everybody to day 2 of TDX. We are so excited to see all y'all. We cannot wait to share some of the exciting work that we're doing here on the Flow team. Raise your hand just by show of hands if you guys have gotten to hear a little bit about some of the stuff Flow is doing just yet. All right, so I see a couple of hands. For those of you who don't have your hand raised, we're going to change that today. I'm super excited to be up here with our colleague, and I'll pass it off to Vidya.
Hey everyone, so we're going to be talking today about using agents with Flow and Orchestrator. So you'll hear from, first of all, thank you. Super excited to see you all here today, and it is day 2. It's almost the tail end of the conference, so very honored that you chose to spend your time with us. Right after this, we also have a Flow roadmap session. We'd love it if you guys came to that in room 2020, so just a plug for that as well. And as always, forward-looking statement, make your purchasing decisions based on how awesome the product currently is, not how awesome it's going to be. And with that, my name is Vidya. I am the product manager on most things touching AI and Flow. I work on agent creation from Flow Builder and the Flow agent, which I'll talk about today. But heading us off is Ruben Roy, who works on orchestration. So I'll let you introduce yourself, Ruben, and also kick it off.
Awesome, thanks Vidya. Yeah, my name is Ruben, everyone. I work on the Flow orchestration product. A lot of exciting stuff is happening there. We're going to walk through a couple of orchestrations today just to get a little bit of a feel for what orchestrations are, how they're similar to flows, but also how they might be different. And in addition to that, I also work on the automation app. So this is the automation Lightning app that both administrators but also non-technical users have access to. And I work on Flow approvals, which in part are based on orchestration. So a lot of really exciting work, and definitely come to the Flow roadmap session to learn more about where some of the innovation there is going to be happening. For this conversation, though, what I want to do is just focus a little bit on what orchestration does and what makes it unique. Just by a show of hands, how many of y'all have heard of orchestrations in some way, shape, or form? All right, wonderful. We'll just go over sort of like what the real value out of it is. But first, I just want to set the stage for why this moment is so important for process automation. And process automation is a term that I like to use because when I have conversations with customers about Flow, one of the common areas that we hear about is task automation, particularly things that are short running, that can be done relatively atomically. It's either done or it isn't, that don't require a lot of extensive auditability. Flows are fantastic for that. But over the past couple of years, as we've talked with more and more customers, we've realized that there is a requirement, especially in the world of business processes and IT, for something more robust. And I just want to set the stage as to why that's important. The process automation market is growing very, very fast, and IT in particular is a really, really critical part of that. And it's super important to be able to fast track the work between different departments to make that possible. So not just having a single department deploying an automation, but having multiple departments collaborate at once. That is something that all of us are experiencing today. And the reason why I bring that up is because that's what Flow orchestration was built to address. Today, we need to unify complex business processes, and it's not something you can easily do in Flow. There's a lot of really powerful capabilities that Flow has, but there are also areas where Flow needs something extra in order to work across departments. The thing that makes orchestration unique is that it allows you to parallelize multiple tasks that happen across multiple departments. Think provisioning a laptop, which has to be approved by finance and compliance and legal, or onboarding a new employee, which has to go through several different stakeholders at once. That parallelism isn't often as easy to find or create within a single flow. For those of you who are a little bit more experienced, you know that there are some ways we can work around that. So for example, we can use wait elements in order to make a semblance of parallelization. But we also know that it takes a lot of legwork to get there. And when we do get that type of behavior that we want, it gets hard to version manage, it gets hard to debug. The great thing about orchestrations is that it comes with that capability out of the box. And hand in hand with parallelization is multi-user capability. So not only can you execute multiple threads in parallel, but you can distribute them amongst multiple end users. That's super powerful. ScreenFlows, for example, provide a really incredible capability for end users to interact with richly formatted end user experiences. We call them screens. Orchestrations use those screens for multiple end users at once. For example, compliance, legal, and finance approving a purchase. Other factors that make orchestration really powerful and that are differentiators are the fact that it is really long running. Some flows can run pretty long, right? So for a good example is like a record triggered flow can run for years, but for the most part, you're not looking at using a flow for an extended period of time, whereas orchestrations are particularly designed to run for a very long, months plus long duration of time. One of my favorite examples of this is one of our biggest customers is an airline actually that uses orchestrations in order to handle their ticketing processes. And anybody here that's booked an airline ticket knows that that can be a pretty long period of time between when you book a ticket, when you inevitably change that ticket, when you maybe have to file a complaint if the service wasn't up to expectations, et cetera, et cetera. And being able to track that over the period of time that's required is something that orchestration is really, really good at doing. And not a factor when you're dealing with what can be very long business processes. And going back to what we were talking about earlier, that's a big difference between how a lot of the customers that we've chatted with think about the difference between processes and tasks. In addition to being more complex and more parallelized, processes just tend to exist over a longer time span. And then finally, something that anybody who has done reporting in this room is probably familiar with is that it can be challenging to audit or report on a flow in progress. There are ways to do it, for sure. You can like write to an object as a flow is running and kind of iterate element by element to see where it pauses. But out of the box, it can be challenging to understand if a flow fails, at which point it has failed. For the most part, people think of flows as ephemeral. And we're doing some great work to improve that. But the cool thing with orchestration is that you can immediately see where in the orchestration workflow it has been stopped or paused and audit how that's happened. Just a little bit of background before I kind of show you a little bit of visual behind this description. We actually, when we create an orchestration, we have an orchestration run object that is created as the backing for that orchestration, and that object itself tracks where in the orchestration it has been paused or stopped and for how long. And it's really easy to create an out-of-the-box report that basically goes through that list of orchestration run objects and says where your orchestration has been paused, which is all a lot of really nerdy background to say it is really, really simple and turnkey to figure out where your orchestration or business process is stopped, why it is, and diagnose it immediately. I wanted to tell all of you this because I think it's really valuable, instead of starting with the visual of what an orchestration is, to understand a little bit about why we wanted to create this product. And it's really because of these things. Customers knew how powerful Flow was, but they needed these problems addressed, and that's kind of where orchestration was born. So what I want to do next is walk all y'all through a simple Flow orchestration. This is a video that I've recorded, and I'm happy to talk a little bit more about sort of like what the specifics behind this are. This is a super simple flow orchestration. In fact, it's so simple you might even try and be able to make it out of a regular flow. But after this, we're going to go into a more complex version and get an understanding of how that works.
Hey everyone, my name is Ruben Roy, and I'm a product manager.
Okay, that's not working. So I will turn the volume off and explain as we go. So what you're looking at right now is the flow. You know what? I'm going to blow this up a little bit so that all y'all can see it. Cool. Okay, so what you're looking at right now is the Flow orchestration builder, and in case you can't tell, it's the exact same as Flow Builder. In fact, it says it right here. That's really important. One of the big things that we've done is we've created this product is make sure that a lot of the really powerful insights you guys have gained building flows maps decently well to orchestrations. As you can tell, it's different. It doesn't look like your everyday flow, but there are a lot of similarities. So what you're looking at right now is a orchestration for HR case management, and it is a record-triggered orchestration. Means in a lot of similar ways, it means something similar to what it means for a flow to be record-triggered. You have an object, in this case it's going to be the HR case object, and when that HR case object is created, you are going to have a underlying edit made. We're actually going to go to the HR case object. We're going to see a little bit about what that's like. And the cool thing is that orchestrations, you can access the exact same way as you access a regular flow. In this case, you can do it by going to the Automation Lightning app, or as I'm walking through here, you can also do it by going to the flows page through setup, which you're about to see right here. So you're seeing orchestrations under the Automation Lightning app. This is really powerful, especially if you have like marketers in your organization that wouldn't ordinarily be privy to what happens in setup. They're still able to access these should they need to. And then as I was saying, very, very easy to go to setup and do the same. You go to setup, everybody knows this one, especially, I don't have to explain to this audience, but you go to flows and you will see your orchestrations available as well. So in this case, you'll see like the flow orchestration for CMS, but you'll see all of them listed here and you can filter accordingly. So the exact same way you access a flow is the same way you access an orchestration. And that maps, that kind of extension also applies to the way you build a flow versus a flow orchestration. It's super similar. You're using effectively the same builder. Cool. So I'm just syncing our talk track here. So a couple of things now. I want to just show you guys what it looks like for the triggering to occur. So in this case, it's going to be when an HR case is created. You can actually use the same trigger explorer that we use in Flow for orchestration as well. So any of you that are familiar with record triggered flows can apply that same type of reasoning here. So what you're seeing right now is when the HR case is created, unconditionally, we're going to have this orchestration run. I'm going to show you guys, by the way, in a second, what it means to have like an HR case be created and what the user experience is going to be for an end user that wants to use this on the back end. And then the next up, the thing that I want to walk all you through, by the way, sorry for the pauses, but I think it's helpful to just take a pause and look at some of this stuff instead of following the mouse. What you're looking at right here is what's called a stage. So a stage is an abstraction of a series of steps, and a step comprises of a subflow. So in this case, the stage is the part of the business process that's going to process the HR case request. And then subsequently, you have a step that's going to call a screen flow. And the way that we know it's going to call a screen flow is because it is an interactive step. There are two types of steps. There are background steps, which are auto launch flows, and there are interactive steps, which are screen flows. And the reason why that's important to remember is that orchestration basically consists of stages like this, which are themselves composed of steps, and decision elements. And using that, you're able to navigate some really complex processes. You're not seeing all of that in this automation, but in a second, we're going to walk through something way more complicated and see how all of those things come together. So let's take a look at what happens when you click into a step, because this is where things get really cool, and you can actually like decompose an orchestration into its constituent flows. And that's probably what got a lot of y'all interested in our work. It's also what enables us to connect orchestrations to agents, which is a really exciting opportunity. So let's take a look at the step. In this case, the step is we're going to submit the case, and the action they're going to take is submit HR case. That action is itself a screen flow. And we're going to open that and see what that screen flow looks like. This is just walking through like how you can add another stage, by the way. So you can add a stage, you can add like a background step, for example, and then select a corresponding flow for that background step. And we'll see how that works in a broader flow in a second. Cool. So now what we're looking at is when we click into the screen flow that comprise the submit HR case that we saw. This should look familiar to everybody because this is just your regular screen flow. In fact, when you're creating an orchestration, a good best practice is to have your constituent flows ready to begin with, and then you can just plug and play when you're creating the orchestration itself. A sneak peek, by the way, is orchestration team is working actively on being able to create a new flow while you're building an orchestration so that you don't have to toggle back and forth between existing flows and the orchestration you're building. But right now, the best way to think about it is you want to create your constituent flows and subsequently create the orchestration that uses all of them. In this case, what you're looking at is a screen flow. Like we talked about, it's an interactive step. And it's pretty basic. It's exactly what we talked about earlier. It's just your regular screen flow. In this case, we're going to select a case type. So it can be like an incident, a complaint, something like that. And then the urgency, so like how important it is, which can inform time frame, and then which specific employee is going to be affected by it. We're going to see how this works in a second. You can see the object types that we're using for API name and object API name here. And then we're going to update the record with the information that we just got. Cool. So we're going to do two things next. We're going to debug this orchestration, and then we're going to show you how it works in real life. Cool. So in this case, we're going to debug, and it's pretty similar to the way you debug a regular flow. So you're going to want to take the information from the sample case object, which is like a sample HR case that I just created for this. And you're going to want to use that in order to trigger the debug experience, which is what I'm about to do here. Select sample, pretty anticlimactic to be honest. The flow just runs, or the orchestration just runs. And we're going to see in a second like how this is actually going to work. But you basically have the start condition triggered, and then you go through the various stages. And then in a moment, we're going to continue in work guide. And you might be wondering, well, what is work guide? What is the relevance of that? That's what I'm about to show you in a second, because that's how an end user is going to use all of the automation that you just generated. So let's click into continue in work guide. Look at that, the screen that we created as an interactive step. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select which type of case I want. See? Matches the screen that I generated, or that I created. So let's say it's, what did I pick here? Did I pick incidents? Grievances, okay. So let's say someone files a grievance with medium urgency, and you pick an employee that is impacted by this. You select it, it's done, and the orchestration will complete. So that's pretty cool. You can see how an orchestration works. You can see how debugging it is relatively similar to a flow. But what's really important is what it looks like for an end user. How does someone who's actually going to file a case deal with this? Well, that's what we're about to see in a second. And we're just going through the debug trace right now. Should look pretty familiar. It's relatively similar to what we have in non-orchestration flows as well. OK, now the fun part. I've been foreshadowing it for a while. We're going to go to the sample case. And look at that. We have the work guide component up here, and we can submit it. Might be wondering, well, how is it that we add that component? We're going to show you that in a second. But right now, I'm actually doing it in the work guide. So the work guide is the component on the object page where I can take the action that is specified by the interactive step. And those actions can be way more complicated than this relatively simple screen flow. You can have multiple screens. I'm going to show you that in the next video, actually, of like what that might look like. But right now, this is just a very simple thing where you have an object page and you add some information about, in this case, an HR grievance that you have. There you go. Your work item is completed. Now it's ready for review. And the cool thing is that it's really easy to add that work guide component to an object. And I'll show you how to do that just in a moment. So skipped ahead a little bit there. OK, so we are in the HR case. And what we want to do is we go to Edit Object. Sorry, one moment. Sorry, we go to the sample, we go to Edit, and then we can go to Lightning App Builder. Just skipping ahead because I've talked through a lot of this. Here we go. So we have a case that doesn't yet have the work guide component, or where that we can add a work guide component to. And if I wanted to add yet another, just go to Orchestration Work Guide, drag and drop. So what we went through is a lot of information, but honestly, it's not that profound for a lot of us that have used flows before. Just to recap, we have orchestrations, which you access the same way as you access flows, in the same builder that you build a flow. You add a component to your object that you use in the same Lightning App Builder that you customize those object pages on. And then you use screen flows in order to actually interact with those objects and trigger the orchestration. Let me just pull that up. And that's really powerful. This is super simple. This is like a very basic case, but what I'm going to do next is show you what happens when you add a lot more complexity. Just by a show of hands, though, does that seem pretty exciting to everybody in this room who used a flow before? It's pretty cool. And one of the things we hear from customers a lot is that it's always really exciting when you get these capabilities, but you don't have to relearn like a whole new tech stack to do it. There we go. All right, now let's walk through another flow orchestration, but this time a lot more complicated. And I like to go through things like this because it shows you just how much of a bang for your buck you can get with something as basic as decision elements, stages, and steps. And that's a pretty common pushback that we get from customers, which is we don't have all of the capabilities that flows have directly in orchestration. Like stages, steps, and decisions is not a whole lot. Like how can we navigate something as complicated as like an ERP procurement order, for example? I saw a really gnarly orchestration about that earlier. And it turns out you can do a whole lot because you're calling constituent flows within each of those steps. And what's really exciting is, in the case we're about to see, you can also call an agent. And that's what Vidya is going to talk a little bit more about in a moment. In this case, what we're looking at is a record-triggered orchestration where we want to do incident management. And so the idea is that we're going to be collecting some data from an end user about what happened, like what the incident was. We're going to be confirming some data from them, and then we're going to have some decisioning about what's going to happen after that incident has occurred. This is a really big orchestration, though, so it actually takes a little bit to scroll through. In this case, the trigger is a little bit more complicated. I didn't open Trigger Explorer this time, but we do it when an incident is created, but we have some conditions. In this case, when the risk and state reach certain thresholds, which makes sense for any incident that you'd be dealing with. And then zooming out a little bit, what you're looking at right now is just the general interface. So in this case, it's a multi-stage or a multi-stage orchestration. So you have several stages that you go through. I actually like to analogize this to like stages that you might see on like a flow chart, or you work in sales like a sales funnel. It's really easy to visualize that way. An active piece of work that we're trying to do is figure out how we can use those stages to visualize more easily where in the process you are, especially when you have a lot of agents. That's like a really exciting opportunity. We've done some cool work on visualizing where agents are in a complex process before. So something cool that we're working on doing more with, and if you want to talk more about that, happy to chat. But what you're looking at right now is like a vertical version of the different stages of that process. And then down here, you're seeing a decisioning split. And we'll talk in a moment about what that decision split is. And then here, this basically redirects you to another part of the flow, another part of the orchestration where that decisioning has taken you. So it's analogous to a loop. That's the way we show it in orchestration. It keeps the canvas lighter, which I know everybody here cares a lot about. So to start with, we have an interactive step, in this case, just capturing the details of what's happened in this incident. So you open that up, and it's going to be a screen flow. And it's a couple of screens this time. So in this case, it's like the type of operating system. I think it's like when you got it, did you try and restart the browser? All basic stuff that you would want to get if you were doing if you were doing incident management in real life. This is like your basic triage questions. And then after that, you're going to get the user ID and update the record with all of the information that you have. That's just the first step of this orchestration. And it also happens to be the first stage. Now that the new incident has been created, we then want to do the in-progress work. And the in-progress work involves investigation of that case. So in this case, the screen flow itself is going to be a pick list that allows you to indicate what's being done to investigate the case. It's going to update the case, the incident object with that information. And then some of the things that they can indicate is that it needs to be restarted, that it needs to be updated, or that it is broken. Those are some of the things that you can select from the pick list. And then once again, the record is updated with that information. This is where the loop comes in, and I'll try and get us a view where we can see all of it. But basically, once you have the relevant details and the investigation is happening, you don't want to leave your end user, i.e. the person that submitted this incident, hanging. At the same time, you can't provide them an update every day. And so what we do here is we pause them while they're on hold, and we check to see if the incident is resolved. If it is resolved, we're going to send them an email, and you'll see what that looks like in a second. If not, we're going to loop back up here to the pause element and pause for a little while longer. So this is the pausing element. In this case, we're going to be getting the updated records and pausing for an hour, like we talked about. And then if we need to if we need to continue waiting and we don't have any update from debugging, we just go to the top again. Cool. Now we've paused, we've checked, we've seen if there's any update for debugging. Now the ultimate question back on the orchestration is our incident resolved? Because as someone who would have submitted this on the incident management object page where the work guide is, that's all I really care about. And that is the question that this area answers. So is the incident resolved? And what we have here is a screen flow that helps us figure that out. In this case, this is a screen flow for the incident manager to indicate whether or not it's resolved. It can either be yes or it can be no. That's a basic screen flow decisioning that you're seeing here. What's interesting is how that comes up in the orchestration. So if it is resolved, then we close it. And I'll talk about this in a second because it's pretty interesting what you can do here. If it's not resolved, then you just loop back up to the top and you pause for a little while longer. Not too fancy. That's what we do in a lot of cases in flows. You're seeing that capability in an orchestration here. What's really exciting is that a lot of the work here, as far as navigating the process itself, is deterministic. You have to go one step after another. We all know how critical it is to be sequential, especially in something like incident management. But a lot of the actions that you take when you're executing at those different stages isn't necessarily deterministic. And a great example of that is sending an email, especially when you're dealing with, say, like an external third party that's been affected by an incident. Maybe a senior leader who might need some additional coaching or handholding when it comes to understanding what the impact of the incident is. A regular email template might not cut it, and you might not have the staffing power to have a bespoke email written every single time. The reason I bring that up is because that is an opportunity for agents to be called in the flow that then creates the email. So like a really exciting thing that we've been seeing is customers using using like a marketing agent to draft an email that then gets sent out. And the cool thing is with an orchestration, you can also have like a layer of approval. An email is drafted, an overseer that is a human selects that that's okay, and then it gets sent out to whatever stakeholders you want. And that's really exciting because we've all heard about agents here at TDX. All of us are familiar with flows. I don't have to tell any of y'all more about that. What's really exciting is a flow can call an agent, and that agent can be called within an orchestration. And the flow can be called within an orchestration. And that's the exciting opportunity that you have with something like this in the case of creating an email. And like I said, if it's not resolved, then you just go back to being on hold. And I'll show you what happens when you click on that. It just brings you back to that stage. And then for closing the incident itself, you've got the closing email action right here, something that can be easily done by an agent. And then you can also pause it for a duration of time before that. But what's really exciting is that this closing email action taking an agent can then be immediately integrated into your orchestration. And the orchestration team is actively working on how you can integrate agents directly within an orchestration itself, not just through its constituent flows. So another exciting area to keep your eyes peeled on, and something to look out for in the roadmap session as well. So that is a lot of walking through of the different types of orchestration, in this case, a much more complicated one with a lot of jumping around on a Google video. But hopefully that gives y'all a little bit of an idea of what it looks like for an orchestration to be successful and some of the really challenging areas that businesses are dealing with that an ordinary flow can't work on. Now that you've got an understanding of some of the deterministic stuff, though, I want to turn it over to Vidya to talk about how non-determinism can play a role, too. Vidya?
Awesome. Thanks, Ruben. Alrighty, folks. So Ruben just did a really nice overview of orchestration, which is sort of how we conduct the symphony of different flows working together, acting as those instruments. And he also alluded to how we can use agents in Flow. Some of you may be familiar with the fact that you can currently create an agent in Agentforce Studio, leverage that in your flows. But I have some exciting innovations that I want to share with you, one of which is agent creation from the Flow Builder, which is what it sounds like. I'll go into that in more detail in a second. And our Flow automation agent, which does 3 really exciting things: summarization, generation, and conversational flow modification. So I'll talk about how those all work together and how we can kind of go full circle with this journey. If the clicker will let me proceed. All right. So agent creation from the Flow Builder. We've heard from admins that you would really like to stay in your flow of work when dealing with agents in Flow. So now, while you're building a flow, you can just spin up your agent right there. And this will allow you to configure your agent. You see some screenshots here. I'll show a demo in a second, without having the context switching of going between tabs. So this is really exciting, and I'm very excited to bring this to you guys in summer 2026. Our team is actively working on it right now. And I'm going to go ahead and jump into a demo of this. So I have the agent instructions at the bottom because, as you guys may know, prompts and agents can be quite prescriptive, quite long. So I wanted to have this up on the screen so you can reference it while I go through the video. But we're going to start with this identity verification flow. So it should be pretty straightforward as we scroll through it. It looks through things like verifying birth date, verifying postal code, et cetera, to eventually resolve in identifying whether or not the identity has been verified for the customer. And what I decided is that it would be really interesting here to post-verifying identity prioritize the customer based on things like previous support cases, sentiment, NPS, et cetera. So I've decided to go ahead and create my agent with my new create agent element right here. And note that I have the ability to use existing agents in my org. I happen to have the flow automation agent, which I just referred to earlier, active in this org as well, so you can go ahead and look at the description here. As I said, it drafts, summarizes, and modifies Salesforce flows, which is super exciting, and I'll talk more about that in a second. But as I said, I wanted to go ahead and create the agent. So I am going to select Create Agent and get started with configuring. So you'll see in a second that I have the ability to name my agent, which, as I mentioned, I want to be able to prioritize customers, post identity verification, so I'm going to label and description accordingly. And I have the ability to then go ahead and choose whether I want to create a new user or use an existing one. So we're filling all of that in. I'm going to go ahead and opt for new user in this case. Now, the most important part of this process is the instructions that you see on the screen here, so I'm going to talk through that a little bit because we have quite a bit. So for a given contact ID provided by the flow, use the get recent activity for contact action. So I'm referring to a very specific action here that my agent is going to go and then leverage as a tool to retrieve the cases and sentiment data associated with the contact. So what I'm doing here is I'm essentially giving some instruction on what the thresholds look like, what prioritization should look like, and giving some guidelines to the agent, including what to do and what not to do. So how not to get quote unquote distracted. I'm also telling the agent exactly how I want my response to be returned. So the key here is to be very specific and to really treat the agent as you would like an elementary schooler in terms of giving it directions. So I went ahead and did that. I populated my instructions. And you'll see, as I mentioned before, I have the ability to go ahead and set an action. So I can either select an action out of the box. I'm going to scroll through and show you that in a second. Or I can go ahead and create a brand new action. So I just told you guys I want to go ahead and create a brand new action to get recent activity for a particular contact. So that'll be things like cases, sentiment, et cetera. So I'm doing that. So titling and adding a description accordingly. And you'll note here that the reference action type is flow. And the question is, how do I create the flow that I now want to leverage for my agent's action? So that brings us to a very exciting innovation that is GA right now, so I hope that some of the folks in the room are using it. If not, we can talk after the fact about how to get your hands on this. But as you can see, all I'm doing is putting in a very simple prompt to get all of the recent cases and information. And just like that, you'll see this in a few seconds, I have my flow built out that I can go ahead and leverage as an action for my agent to then use. So what's happening behind the scenes is it's parsing my prompt, understanding what the main pieces are, and then eventually generating the metadata to produce this flow for me. It's finishing up. And now you'll see that we've built out our flow that we can go ahead and leverage. And that was a super simple example, so I'll show one more. Because realistically, admins might want to do something a little bit more complicated and really reap the benefits, right? You could either build a very simple flow out, and I have the very long prompt here as well for your reference if you want to take a look at it. But essentially, this is a screen flow for triaging a new prospect, and I've been really prescriptive about how exactly I want the system to handle it. It'll take potentially up to a few minutes to do this, but realistically, once you see this flow built out, and I scroll through it, this is something that manually would take you potentially hours, maybe even days, depending on the complexity of the use case, depending on how experienced you are as an admin as well. So you'll see in just a few seconds that we now have our built-out flow. But that's not all that you can do with our flow automation agent. So I mentioned this earlier. This is probably the fan favorite in terms of the features that we have available. And this is flow summarization. So this is, once again, our identity verification flow. This is going to come up a few more times throughout the presentation. But all I'm going to do is go ahead and ask the agent to simply summarize the flow. And if you and I didn't have the context of what this identity verification flow did before and just glanced at it, it would be quite difficult to kind of understand what exactly it did. But here I have this plain English description of what the flow does. I'm identifying the key objects and fields. And I can also go ahead and make it shorter. So now it's the perfect length to go ahead and add to your description. Maybe some of the people in this room might understand that there's the big problem with documentation for admins. So if you're maybe inheriting an org from another admin, or maybe you created a flow a really long time ago and didn't remember how you documented it, this is exactly the kind of thing that will help with solving that issue. And then last really exciting capability of the flow automation agent is conversational flow modification. And we're just running up on time, so I think I'll be able to finish this. Before assigning the first stage, you can go ahead and add a screen to display accounts and data table. I've just told the agent that in very plain English, and I have a English description telling me what exactly is going to change, as well as changes on the canvas. So this is really powerful. I'm going to go ahead and click in to make sure that it's done the right thing, and then I can go ahead and either accept or reject the changes. So you not only have the ability to put in a potentially very long and prescriptive prompt to get a built-out flow, but also have the ability to go ahead and add, delete, modify elements with prompts, and that will hopefully save time, make flow building more efficient, and easier and more fun as well. So with that, we've now gone through agent creation, flow builder, the capabilities of our flow automation agent, which I hope folks will try soon. And yeah, happy to take questions, and I think we are just about at time. Thanks so much. And one last plug I'll do. If you enjoyed the AI and agents portion of this presentation and are interested in joining our pilot for our new AI-powered flow authoring initiative, please go ahead and sign up. I know some of the folks in the room already have, and super appreciative of that, but we'll be showing sneak peeks of some of the work that we'll be doing. And catch us at a roadmap session. Thank you.